Are your clients reaching a plateau with their rehab and you're unsure what to do next? In this episode, Kelly Dean, a physical therapist at the Tummy Team, shares her insights into what might be stalling your client's rehab progress. Hello, friends. This is Lynn Schulte, and you are listening to the Birth Healing Summit podcast. We are here for meaningful conversations that will transform the way you work with pregnant and postpartum clients. Whether it is a new perspective, tool, or technique, you'll be able to implement it into your practice today. I invite you to sit back, listen with an open mind, and grab the golden nugget today's guest has to offer. Now let's get started. So welcome everybody, and today's guest we have with us Kelly Dean. Kelly Dean is a functional core and pelvic floor specialist with over 25 years of experience, and she founded the Tummy Team. She now works with people online. She has over 12 online courses and has really focused in on the core. And she actually posted something on social media about trauma being held in the abdominal wall. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's going to be such a great topic to talk about. So I wanted to invite you onto the podcast, Kelly, so that we could discuss this further. So how did you come to discover that trauma may be being held in the muscles, which may be delaying or impacting the healing?
Well, it's interesting because I started this work working on diastasis recti, in a lot of prenatal postpartum women. And then over time, it's not just prenatal and postpartum women, it's anybody. I mean, the second most common demographic I see is actually 50 to 75-year-old men, and so I start seeing diastasis more than just and kind of functional core weakness more than just in the prenatal community, in the postpartum community. And what I started over time recognizing is, as I'm working with people, there were a couple things that, if I look back, there's a couple things that I started to notice when I started to touch people's tummy, like massage their abdominals, just pull the transverse together, check them for diastasis. And initially, I'd be looking at their tummy, right? I'd be looking at their stomach. And then I started looking at their eyes. And what would pretty typically, very few people make eye contact when you're exposed their tummy and when you're touching their tummy. And we would call it like they either shut down or they break down. So they either like look off into space and kind of disassociate a little bit, go to their happy place, or they start to cry a little bit. And because there's something emotional happening with my hands on their belly. And or even with their shirt being lifted and their stomach being exposed.
Yeah.
It's like the vulnerable underbelly,
Yeah.
And so I started to recognize that. I started to recognize that the biggest issue I was seeing with clients was not weakness, was not even diastasis, was disconnect, the inability to feel the muscles of their core, which also starts to translate into the muscles of their pelvic floor. Just the unawareness of where those deep postural muscles were, right? There's this disconnect. They can't, it takes a long time for them to get the breath to connect to it, to feel that muscle. And then there was like emotions that would start coming up. I'd have clients coming in and all of a sudden they just cancel their appointments and not come back. Or they would come in and they were just like, I started doing the work you were having me do, and I started feeling things, and then I don't know, my life is overwhelming, I can't deal with anything. And it's just like some of them hit like a speed bump, and some of them just hit a flat on road block.
Kelly, this disconnect, is it mainly in our postpartum clients that you were seeing this disconnect, or is it typical of the men that you were working with and other populations?
It is every population. It
Wow.
is every population. It started out because it's not, I was trying to, make direct correlations. Oh, it's birth trauma related.
Right.
Not necessarily. Sometimes it was fertility stuff. Sometimes it was a history as a child of UTIs.
Oh, sure.
They had UTIs when they were a kid, and it led to them like it being difficult to pee or painful to pee. So then they started holding their pee, and then they started having a hypertonic pelvic floor, and now pain and intimacy hurts, right? And it's like, and they didn't even know. They don't. This is the thing, is they don't even know until we start getting blood flow into that area. We start waking up the nerves. They don't know until it hit the roadblock. So, if anybody has been through counseling, there's this thing that people will, or counselors will often say when they trigger you, when something happens right in the counseling session, and they will say, where are you feeling this in your body right now?
Yes.
Okay. This
Yes.
is a very common thing. And most of the time it's in the gut or in the chest, right? I'm feeling it right here. I can't catch my breath, my heart, or in their gut, like they feel nauseous, or they feel like somebody punched them, or they feel anxious, butterflies in their stomach. I would say that for women, and we can talk about men separately, but this is mostly women that you deal with. But for women, most of the traumatic experiences that women face are between their breasts and their pelvis.
Yes.
So if they were sexually abused or violated in any way, if they had endometriosis, if they had a miscarriage, if they had a hard birth, if they had fertility problems, and so many things. I mean, there's trauma that happens to other places, but it's like the essence of who we are as women, our most vulnerable, sacred part of ourselves, our reproductive organs. And that's where a lot of our trauma has happened. So it makes sense. There's a natural instinct to withdraw from something that's painful. This is a survival technique, right? Like I say, numbness is a refuge for a moment, but it's not a lifestyle, right?
That's good. That's good. Right. Yeah.
It's necessary. It's a gift it's a gift of our body to survive a situation that was out of control, or we felt endangered, or we needed to self-protect. But it becomes a lifestyle of disconnect and of not feeling and numbing out, and then powering through life, and then not feeling the whisper of pain until it's a raging scream of pain.
Right.
Yeah. Because they've deadened all of that part of their body. And so they hit a wall, and it's emotional. It's emotional.
And so that disconnect is part of that trauma response then.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And
it is.
I teach that we want to embrace that response. We want to honor it, like you're talking about,
exactly.
Right? Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
Thank God your body knew how to do that. That's what helped you survive.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yep.
And I say the same thing about pain. I don't feel like pain is our enemy. Pain is a gift. If you don't know that's going to hurt you, you'll keep doing it until you break a bone, or till you die. It's the guardrails on the mountain road. We need to respect it and not go over the cliff.
I love it. Pain are the guardrails on the mountain road. That's beautiful. I like that analogy.
Well, it's a conversation with our body. Our body is communicating to ourselves, and pain is one of the ways it communicates. And often we ignore pain, and we don't have this partnership where we communicate back. And so it's like we ignore it, we shut it down, we power through. And I always say, like, there's a partnership between our body and the essence of who we are, whether that's our soul, our emotions, our mental personality, whatever. There's this, our body is the only, car we get to drive our whole life, right? Yeah. And we should be a partnership. We should be taking care of it. This is the shell that gets, who we are around in the world. But instead, we have this abusive relationship where we ignore it, we shame it, we shut it down, Well,
we try to get rid of it.
Yeah.
I've always found that when we try to get rid of something, it just keeps coming back. So let's embrace it, and let's explore the pain, and let's figure out what message, what job. I always knew pain has a job.
Yes.
it's trying to do for us. So let's figure out what that job is, and then let's renegotiate and see if we can find a different
Yeah,
job.
let's have a response and a communication. I feel like I kind of end up being people's interpreter. They don't know the language that their body's
Yeah.
speaking.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to teach them the language, and eventually they're not going to need the interpreter because they're going to be fluid in that, or fluent in that language.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, so you found this disconnect happening.
Yes.
You noticing that as you're touching the body, people are having an emotional response, they're disassociating. So you know you're dealing with trauma here, right? Okay,
Mhm.
so trauma's coming up, but you're a physical therapist. So how are you addressing trauma? Because isn't that out of our scope of practice, so to speak?
Right, right. And that is the question, right? Like, and this is as physical therapists. I mean, I was trained 25 years ago, and we're trained as physical therapists to almost have like a barrier between us and our clients, right? Because we're going to be touching them intimately. There needs to be, and there needs to be a professionalism there.
Mhm.
Um, and we start delving into stuff like where people are crying and telling us their life
Life
story,
story,
right?
yeah. Yep.
And what do we do in that point? So this is the thing, is what I've learned. So my background before I did this type of work is I was a brain injury specialist. I was a neuromuscular rehab. I worked in brain injury, stroke rehab, some spinal cord, but mostly brain injury type stuff. And so how the nervous system works is very fascinating to me. How our sensory feedback loops, how the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system works. Um, and understanding that. So basically what I am looking at is, yes, there is a counseling component of this. There's a mental health component of this, but there's also counseling that the body needs. There's physical body counseling,
Mhm.
because our body is now responding to something that is no longer a threat. So the situation that happened that caused them to shut down, to go muscle guarding,
Mhm.
to tense up, in the moment that I'm with them is not present. Now, they may have some of that in their life at home, or in some different situations, but in this moment, they are safe
Right.
and they are not in that situation. And so how can we, you said negotiate, but how can we rewrite or recapture how the original design of what that muscle was supposed to do? How can we honor what happened,
Mhm.
not shove the grief down, but release the grief, release the emotion, honor the emotion, recognize what it has done, and allow it to be free to do what it was meant to do now that we're not in that place.
That's so beautifully said. That's exactly what happens, right? It
It
gets
is.
stuck in the tissues. And because we have our hands on the tissues, we're just giving it permission to, one, be recognized, to be observed, and
Yeah.
to release and let it go, and then renegotiate what it should be doing.
Yeah. And I tell people that there's a muscle memory. We've heard this term, muscle memory. I think the biggest thing is that what I have learned is that if I can prepare the clients ahead of time for the potential, the possibility of an emotional reaction to the work we're doing, I have a much better outcome of them coming back. Right? Of them not saying, oh, screw this is too much. I didn't sign up for this. I wanted to get stronger. I don't want to deal with all that stuff from my past. That's not
I
how I
don't
want
want
to.
to cry.
I don't want to cry. So what this is how I explain it, is the muscle shut down after that traumatic event. It kind of went into protective mode so that you could take care of your baby, so that you could get out of the car, so that you could do whatever the thing is you needed to do. Right. And then we never came back and revisited it. So now it's like a lump of coal in there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we first wake that area up, the first memory you're going to have is the trauma. The first emotional response, even though you're not in a, you won't, might not, they might not even remember mentally what the trauma was there, but their body is going to go in the mode of, this is why we shut down. That's going to be the first experience they feel. But it's just the first experience. So I prepare them for the emotions of the first time. And then I say, the second time we do the work, it'll be 50% less. Hands down, it's always 50% less. The next time we do it, it's 50% less of that 50%. So they know, they see the hope and the light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This could be hard, but it's not going to be hard forever. It's going to be hard once and a little bit hard the next time and a little bit hard the next time.
So Kelly, I'm curious about planting that seed, or, and do you always find that the emotion and the trauma comes up in the work that you do?
I tell them that in some cases, this happens. I don't tell them this will happen. I
Okay.
say in some cases, when I give you the homework to do abdominal massage, nobody wants to rub their tummy. I tell them, you are not the only one. Nobody wants to rub their tummy. But if you can be disciplined and stay present in the moment while you're doing it, don't just do it like la, 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 but ground yourself and be in the moment when you do it. It will pay off so much. But I tell them it might make you upset. It might make you unexpectedly vulnerable or emotional or angry or something, anxious. There might be something going on there. It might not, but if it does, don't be terrified. It's just the first time, and it will get better each time. And I can't tell you how many people have said, I am so glad you told me that. I am so glad you prepared me. It's kind of like after birth, if nobody tells you the emotional thing that happens when your milk comes in, why don't we tell people that? Right. That is a nightmare, and nobody warns you, right?
Yeah.
So but if you're prepared for it, it doesn't make it any better. It's still an emotional event, but at least you know what it is, where it came from, and where you're going to get to.
Yeah. And so that's interesting to forewarn, because I would have to say 80% of the time there's tears on my table, if not 90% of the time when I do really any work, right? We have that loving touch on the body. And sometimes it's the first time the body's ever felt that. But I can't say I go into my sessions warning people that there's going to be an emotional release, because I don't really know.
Right. I sometimes, when I first, it depends, like in the interview process, like in the initial intake process, if I'm reading stuff that I know it's going to be a nightmare, then I say, wow, your body's been through a lot.
Yeah. Yep.
Your body is amazing. You have survived a lot. I would love to help you get past the surviving into the thriving.
Yeah.
And sometimes they start crying right then. And I have Kleenexes right there. I said, there's a reason the Kleenex box is right there, because you're not the only person that cries in here.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's welcome. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. This is important work, and it's emotional, but it's going to get better, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And then sometimes it doesn't happen until I put my hands on them and I say, this can be really hard, but it's going to be okay. It's okay. Feel whatever you need to feel right now, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and then when my biggest concern, not my biggest concern, obviously I'm concerned when they're in the space with me, but I want them to come back to the next session. I want them to do the next part of the work, right?
Yeah.
I don't want them just to release all this mess and then just live in it, right? I want them to come back for the next thing. So I think that that's why it's really important when I'm sending them home with homework that I know is going to continue to stir the pot to prepare them for the potential. And one of my colleagues recently coined the phrase educated hope. And I love this term, that I am going to give them educated hope. I bring the science into it, so it's not too emotional of what's happening in their body and how it heals and why this step is important. And then I bring the experience in. I've worked with thousands of clients and they all go through this process. You are not the only person. And there is a path through this.
Yeah. So that trauma being stuck in the body and the tissues is causing the disconnect, causing the muscles not to be able to function fully until it's addressed, really, right? I mean, you've never been able to get someone's core to activate with trauma still stuck in it, correct?
Well, I'm not going to say we've addressed all of the trauma in their life, obviously, but we've
Whatever's being held in that tissue.
yeah, we've acknowledged that. It's a common saying that we say it's really difficult to heal something you cannot feel.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is not, it's kind of like in birth, I teach at a midwifery college. It's like you can't power through labor. It's about letting go, right?
Yes.
You have to let go and release in labor. And we power through in our culture, in our fitness, in our, the lifestyle is
Yeah.
power through. And that is not actually how our body was designed to function. And so it
Yeah.
doesn't function well in that.
Yep. And that's so true because when do we see the most damage? When someone's powered through it and pushed the baby out because they just wanted to get it out.
Yeah, or they refuse to have any interventions even after 7 hours of pushing.
Mm, yeah.
7 hours of pushing. And okay, like we lose sight of what was the goal here. What we lost sight of the goal.
Yeah.
Here,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's there's a lot to it, but it's been such rewarding work because I get to walk alongside people on this journey where they are reclaiming a part of themselves that they forgot they even had. And
Mm,
one of the things that on the other side of this work is once they connect to that deep core corset muscle, it's like their eyes open up. It's like their eyes light up and it's almost like, oh, there I am.
yeah.
Like they forgot who they were at their deepest core. They hadn't felt that since before the trauma, since maybe childhood, since, they were
Yeah.
an athlete, in their freshman year of high school, whatever. And there's this reunion that happens to that inner part of themselves. And it's emotional. It's like, and it's something like they didn't know it was missing until we gave it back to them. And then it's like, how was I living without this? It's like, exactly. How were you? Not well.
Right. Yeah. So what would you want to say to those therapists working in this population that's like, well, I don't work with trauma. I don't deal with trauma.
If you work in this population, then you're working with trauma. I mean, and so this is the thing is trauma is this tricky word because I worked with a trauma therapist, a counselor, and she's like, well, the medical definition of trauma is a life-threatening event. And we're overusing the word trauma. I get that. Okay.
Yeah.
There's also a more broad term of trauma that I think most people understand is a moment in your life where you felt out of control, unprotected, endangered, and in need to remove yourself or protect yourself in some way, whether you could do it or not, you wanted to.
Yeah.
So any of that, I mean, and think about all of the different procedures that happen during a birth. A
Yeah.
lot of things are out of your control during fertility stuff, during a miscarriage, during just a pelvic exam, there's a lot of stuff. So I would say if we don't have to be their counselor. We're not called to be their counselor, but we can play a role of acknowledging and honoring the emotional component of the physical pain and the physical component of the emotional pain.
There is a connection, isn't there? There's
100%. And even, I know this is not about men, but even in the men that I see,
yeah. It's
we
body
think
issues.
women are the only ones that have body issues. Oh my gosh. Men, even in their 70s, don't want to take off their shirt at the beach with their grandkids,
Yeah.
like, I mean, there's stuff, there's stuff everybody carries, and we don't know somebody else's story. And this is the other thing that I think is really, that I've learned, is we don't get to define somebody's trauma.
Absolutely.
What is traumatic for one person, another person could have had that same experience and it not be traumatic for them. Trauma is in the eyes of the owner of it, you
Yeah.
know. And
It's all
so
about your perception.
it is, their body is holding it. If you go to like pretend to hit somebody and they tense up and then their neck spasms, you can't say, well, I didn't hit you, your neck shouldn't have spasmed. You
Right.
know, it doesn't matter, their neck is spasming, that doesn't help anything, you
Right.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the issue does lie in the tissue. And I feel doing the work in the core, whether it's just belly, whether it's internally or externally, I think you're helping us to broaden or open our eyes to the idea that it can be in the belly. It doesn't need to be in the pelvic floor muscles. And that we as therapists need to have some sort of ability to be able to handle whatever comes up in our clients' bodies in their reaction to our touch, and feeling comfortable with that. And no, we need to know our what our comfort level is. Like, there's people I work with and it's like, okay, I'm not able to get to the level that you need, so I'm going to refer you out.
Exactly.
But I think that what you were talking about with that, this lower stuff, I call it the small t trauma. Like, I do wish we had another word
Right.
for those things, because there's capital T trauma and there's lower T trauma, and they both affect us, our tissues. And we as therapists, I feel, need to have some skills to be able to work with whatever comes up with our clients, so that if something big does come up, we don't just freak out and freak them out more.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I feel like I don't do internal pelvic floor work. But I do functional pelvic floor work, right? And I teach the clients to do some internal work on themselves and some, muscle work, energy work on themselves. And that's really powerful. So sometimes um the core seems like a fairly safe place to touch, right? Versus the pelvic floor, like that's very vulnerable, very open, but it's a very vulnerable place for people. But even if I can't go right to the core, even just having my hands here, or on their chest or on their arms, like sometimes, just like you said, they're not used to having touch, and there's just incredible power of healing in physical touch, in a lot of different
Absolutely.
types of physical touch, and we'll talk about that more in the other part
Yeah.
of our.
So Kelly's going to be joining us for the Birth Healing Summit this year. So please make sure you continue learning more during that interview during the summit. So we'll check that out. One thing I do want to mention, Kelly, before we end this, before we wrap it up, is that I've learned once that the back part of our body is about support and the front part of our body is about protection. And
Mhm.
so it makes sense to me that as you're working on that belly, that it's so vulnerable, because people are, that's where we're supposed to be protected.
Well, you think about all of our vital organs that
Mhm.
are in, basically from the nipple line, to the pelvic pubic symphysis, right? Like all of our vital, other than our spinal cord and our brain,
Yeah.
everything else is in that area, right? The things that keep us alive. But more than just the things that keep us alive, it's kind of part of our identity, in that area of our body too, and where we hold things and how we process things. And I think it's just, I think when we need to be a little bit more holistic when we're helping people, um, and it's not just a physical shell of a body,
Yes.
it's not just a shell, it's not just a shell of a body driving them around. There is an intertwine in how our emotions, and even just how we think. Sometimes when we're thinking, we clench our jaw, you know there's different things that trigger a physical response in our body, and to dismiss that or not validate it or to skirt around it because it's uncomfortable for us, I feel like we're missing something. We're
We're doing,
missing
yeah, we're
people
doing a
get stuck.
disservice.
Yeah, they're going to get stuck and they're going to go, oh, I went to physical therapy and it didn't work for me.
Right. And that's where we as practitioners, when the healing is not progressing, we need to dive deeper. And
Or we need to be okay sending them to somebody else.
yeah,
I think one of the things that in all of the I have continuing ed courses as well, and I also teach at that midwifery. So I teach professionals, and one of the things that I am so strongly about is, just because you don't know doesn't mean there isn't an answer. Just because you don't have the skill doesn't mean there isn't a skill out there. Right. And I think that we have hold so much power as medical professionals that we have to act like we know everything. And if we don't know, and I see this, and I'm sure you see this all the time, that things are blown off by doctors and by other medical professionals. They'll say, oh, that can't be fixed. Just because you can't fix it doesn't mean it can't be fixed. And what I add in like the growth mindset with us, just because you don't know it yet
yeah,
doesn't mean it's not out there. Just because you can't fix it right now doesn't mean you won't learn how to fix it. So we have to be really careful with our words. We need to be really careful by putting boundaries on people's ability and their capacity for healing. Just because they got stuck with us, they just might have moved out of our skill set.
absolutely. Yeah. And have others that you want to refer them on to. I
Absolutely.
I have my list of practitioners that I
I don't know everything.
exactly. And I don't want to have to know everything. That's
Oh,
a lot of pressure.
it's too much. Like I'm good at a few things. you know, my
Yes.
my husband has this thing often that he'll say to me when I'm getting frustrated. He's like, honey, you just can't be good at everything. And it's the sweetest way of saying you're really good at a lot of things, but you can't be good at everything. So when you're not good at everything, find the people around you that are good at that thing and
Yeah.
create a team, create a
Yes.
network,
Yes.
create a community.
Thank you, Kelly. These are amazing, amazing words that you shared with us. And so I just hope everybody listening in can keep in mind that when our clients, their healing is not progressing, when they're not able to really connect in and feel the contractions of the muscles, there may be a deeper root going on. There may be a deeper issue, which may be trauma related. And if you yourself don't feel comfortable going there, please make sure you refer out to get them the support. And I've had that in the past where I've worked with someone and go, I just can't get to what you need. So go work with someone else and then come back. And
Right.
then they do.
Well, and the other thing just to put out there is, you may not have anybody around, but this is when I posted that post that you found,
Uh-huh.
or you saw that one day. It was we had posted a whole series about how trauma and emotions and stuff, because we had just launched our 2 online courses for clients to go. One is just, it's called core support, and it's if there's no pelvic floor stuff involved at all. It's for our men, it's for somebody that had a surgery, it's that kind of thing, or a car accident or something like that. The other one is nurturing core, and it's core and pelvic floor. And it is a step-by-step process to take somebody through this nurturing reconnection through the trauma, through the grief. And what my mental health colleagues call it is body counseling. It's the body counseling component. And so if they're stuck, and this is like outside of what you have gotten training in or you feel comfortable in, there are resources, and this resource is, it's designed for them to do it on their own with my support, step by step, anywhere that they live. So it's a beautiful resource, and I want it. We had talked about this earlier. I created the resource not to make $1 million. I created the resource to help people. So I would love for people to take advantage of that.
Awesome. And you are giving a 20% discount off of any of your online courses. So please check that out in the show notes, everybody. So you can take advantage of that. As practitioners, we should be learning this. And so we know who of our clients would be best to refer to as well. So everybody, please check that out. Oh, Kelly, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And we'll look forward to hearing what you have to say more on the Birth Healing Summit. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening in, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care. Bye. Today's podcast was brought to you by the Institute for Birth Healing. To discover more, visit instituteforbirthhealing.com. To claim $50 off of any online course, use coupon code PODCAST50 at checkout. Till next time, I'm Lynn Schulte, founder of the Institute for Birth Healing.